Hey, who wants to see God move in their kids' lives? Their grandkids' lives? Want their kids and grandkids to know His presence? Tonight, the youth are having the first of revival nights. For the first, yeah. And during the service tonight, behind the stage, there will be a group of people interceding for that revival night. And if you want to see God move, I encourage you to join us 6 p.m. tonight to just pray for the Lord to move and to work as He wants to work in that. So make sure to join us for that, okay? Cool. Yeah. Where 2 or 3 are gathered, or where 2 or 3 amen. I think that's how the scripture goes. You guys. We're coming to the end of our series called Your Move. Coming to the end, I unfortunately have to say, in spite of the fact that I wanted originally for it to continue for several more weeks. Next week is going to be the end because we're kicking off a new series the week after leading up to Easter, something that I had planned on starting a week later, but then just felt like the Holy Spirit said, no, you need to start here. And so move that a week forward, which means we had to shorten and put 2 together next week. It's going to be good. You don't want to miss it. But that means we're coming to the end. The series is really very basic in its approach. God moves, we respond, right? When God moves, we respond. That this is, every time He moves, He expects from us a response, right? So when He calls, we come. That's what Jesus said, come to me. And then when He saves us, there is an expectation that we will immediately get planted, that we will be planted in the church. Too many say, oh yeah, I don't need to be in the church, I am the church. But in reality, you cannot be the church without the rest of the church. And so there's a calling for us to participate. And then we talked about the fact that there is that our response is to serve, that as He came and He served, He came to serve, not to be served, that in response then we serve, and that there is no better way to know Him than to serve. As we serve, there are things we will learn about Him that we will learn about no other way. And so it is a gift to us. We often think of service as its benefit for others, but in reality, service benefits us. And so there's a challenge for us to be those who serve. Last week we talked about the challenge of participating in, reading, knowing the voice of God in the Word. And that this is an invitation, Him revealing Himself in this form, that we are incredibly blessed to be able to carry something like this around, something that for generations was not possible, but is possible. And now you can even have it on your phone so that everywhere you go, you can have His Word right in front of you. And that if you want to know His voice, that you better learn it here. And so there's an invitation, I think the greatest invitation, to know Him in His Word. And today, before we get into next week, which is going to be on prayer and hearing the voice of the Spirit, this week I want to read to you one of my favorite stories in the Bible. So grab your Bibles, open them up to 2 Samuel chapter 23. 2 Samuel chapter 23. A long time ago, I was a youth pastor. And when I was a youth pastor, I preached a sermon on Jacob's drink offering, where he builds an altar and he pours out an offering on it. And that really grabbed my attention. From then on, it was one of those things that I've just really wanted to study, and I've studied it for years, reading about it. Because the drink offering is unlike any of the other offerings that you find in Scripture, whereas, like with Passover, for example, we know exactly what it symbolizes. That there is this symbolism of, in Passover, the price of sin is death. You can't avoid it, I'm sorry, but that's the way it works. And that we have all sinned, and that every single one of us deserve that. But then you see in this sacrifice not only that the penalty of sin is death, you also see in that sacrifice the fact that it is possible for someone else to stand in for you, to be a substitute on your behalf. It's clearly seen in this sacrifice, and it's talked about in Scripture that it's clearly seen. Or the Day of Atonement, where the priest would pronounce over one goat all of the sins of everybody and then send that goat off into the wilderness on its own. You see in this a couple of things. You see, number one, that God's desire is to remove your sin from you, but also that sin is something that isolates. That sin is one of those things, and I've seen it time and time again in my own life and others, that when you sin, that there is isolation definitely from God, but also from other people as well. That it separates you and pushes you away from others. It's an incredibly isolating thing when we are in sin. But there isn't anything like that about the drink offering. It doesn't say this is what this or what this means or what this symbolizes. Instead, what you find in Scripture is, hey, and offer a drink offering along with this other offering. And some people think, okay, so that's like offering God a drink. But God does not, in those sacrifices, look for us to supply something to him. There's something else happening here. And so for years, I've reflected on this and thought about this. And I love the story. One time I built a little a pile of stones here, an altar on stage, and I poured out oil to see what it looked like and wine on top of that to show what it was like for Jacob. And it's an incredible thing to actually pour something out before God, to actually go through that process of speaking to surrender, speaking to trusting God with it, because once it's out, it doesn't go back in, right? And then Paul in Philippians talks about the fact that his life was poured out as a drink offering. And so I've loved this, and I've read about it. And the story we're going to read from today is the story of David's drink offering. I've read it to you before. It's been multiple years, but I love this story. And one of my favorite stories, because it is one of the first stories that I read that I said, what in the world is happening here? And really studied it. And that was before I was a believer. I was reading this story. It's been meaningful for that reason. John Koski passed away on Friday. If you remember John, he was the gentleman who in October was on this stage sharing with us life and death. He had ALS, and his body was going through that process, and he was approaching his own death, and he spoke freely about what that looked like for him. John was a kind of person who, as I think of a drink offering, a life poured out as a drink offering before the Lord, surrendered to his will, constantly giving what the Lord had given him. That passage in Philippians, that's the guy I think of. And so the drink offering has been meaningful to me for all of those reasons and more. And I want to read this story of David's own drink offering. To set it up, let me just start by saying not everybody loved David. When we look back on it, everybody's like, oh man, King David, he was the king, right? But at the time, that's not the way it was. That not everybody loved him. Part of the reason why people didn't love him, one of the reasons was that he was from the tribe of Judah. Judah was the strongest of the tribes, and so everybody else in all the other tribes were very wary of Judah. Because if somebody took from the power base that is the largest of the tribes, they could own everything, right? And so they were afraid of that. That's part of the reason why they so liked Saul as king and accepted him, was because he was from the tribe of Benjamin, the smallest of the tribes, the weakest of the tribes. And so it was okay that he was king. But then when David's star starts rising, there was this fear of what that could mean for all the other tribes. And so even after Saul's death, he was killed by the Philistines. Story that's kind of brutal and ugly in its own right. But Saul dies. Judah anoints David king. But then the rest of the tribes gather together and anoint Saul's son, Ishbi-Benob, as king. And so they all follow him, while, not Ishbosheth. Sorry, Ishbi-Benob is the giant that was slain by Abishai. Totally different dude. Ishbi-Benob, he's on my mind for a different reason. But anyways, so David, Judah, everybody else, Ishbosheth. And so for 7.5 years, the tribes are split. During that time, you see David's power growing. You see the house of Saul kind of waning. Eventually, Ishbosheth dies. And when he does, everybody gets together and anoints David as king of all of the tribes. What's so interesting is, as soon as that happens, David first realizes, because he's a politician, He realizes that he can no longer have his capital city in the middle of Judah. If he does, then everybody will always see him as the king of Judah and everybody else. And so, being a brilliant tactician and also politician, he says, I've got to find a different capital city. So he goes north and he conquers the city that had never really fully been conquered by the people of Israel, Jerusalem. So he takes this capital city, makes it his own. And the reason why Jerusalem was perfect was it was right between. It was between Judah and the rest of the tribes, between Judah, even in Benjamin. It was really on the fault line between all of the different tribes. It was probably the weakest point, but then becomes the strongest point. It becomes Jerusalem, right? It's brilliant, brilliant tactic, brilliant move on his part. But then as he does that, that's where we pick up the story. And immediately it says, after that happens, the Philistines, who didn't care what was going on in Israel when they were divided, as soon as the entire nation of Israel comes together under one king, they are a threat. So the Philistines all gather together and they attack at that moment. I'm going to read a little background here for you before we get to 2 Samuel chapter 23. I'm going to start in 2 Samuel chapter 5, verse 17. Here's what it says there. When the Philistines heard that David had been anointed king over Israel, all the Philistines went up to search for David. But David heard of it and went down to the stronghold. Now the Philistines had come and spread out in the valley of Rephaim. The valley of Rephaim just means the valley of giants. It's an incredibly fertile valley. It's a valley that hundreds of years later, when Isaiah is sharing a prophecy about harvesting, the image he decides to use of a fertile harvest is the valley of Rephaim. And he just references it and moves on. Like everybody would know, this is the place where the good harvests come from. Incredibly lush valley. Even to this day, you could see pictures of it, and it is still lush to this day. You know where it is? Right next to Jerusalem. It is just to the south of Jerusalem. It is the approach to Jerusalem from the southwest. And so the Philistines hear that that the entire nation has united under David, and David has taken a new capital city. And so the Philistines decide to attack in the very space where he had just won a victory, but also the very space where he was weakest. They are now positioned separating the tribes, right in between them. And they stay spread out, build a stronghold area in the valley of Rephaim, to the point where it says that David has to flee Jerusalem and go down to the stronghold. And the stronghold, we know exactly what that's talking about. This is not the only time that David will have to flee from Jerusalem as king, but it is the first time. And it happens no sooner than he had just taken the city. So the Philistines come at what should be a moment of celebration, and they invade, and they become a wedge right back between the tribes that he had sought to unite. That's the setup. I'm going to keep reading, though, and this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, because we're going to be reading about what happens between verse 17 and 18 and what we're about to read. Verse 19. And so David inquired of the Lord, "Shall I go up against the Philistines? Will you give them into my hand?" And the Lord said to David, "Go up, for I will certainly give the Philistines into your hand." And David came to Baal-perazim, and David defeated them there. And he said, "The Lord has broken through my enemies before me like a breaking flood. Therefore, the name of that place is called Baal-perazim. And the Philistines left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away." So David goes and he hides in the stronghold, and he inquires of God there as people are gathering to them, "Should I go and fight them there in the middle of this valley?" And God says, "Yes, and I will give them to you." And so he goes and he fights them and he crushes them. So he names the place where he fought them. We're not exactly sure where it is, but he names that place the God of the breakthrough. The God of the breakthrough. Because he absolutely crushes the Philistines. This and the next battle, it keeps going, and there's another battle, and we don't know how close they are on each other's heels. But this one battle right here is considered the great battle at the beginning of David's kingship, which sets the tone for everything. From this point forward, up until now, remember, Philistines had killed Saul. They were an existential threat to Israel to this point. Like they could keep Israel from existing. From this point forward, they are no longer that. The back is broken. From now on, they are nothing more than a nuisance. Eventually, they fade entirely from history. This battle is that. And I love it because even in the middle of it, as you got this spot where he's like, you are God of the breakthrough, and names that place the God of the breakthrough. It says the Philistines left their idols there, and David and his men carried them away. Isn't that great? Like, because they brought these idols with them to help them fight the battle. But then when they have to turn around and run, Bob or whoever dropped them. And the idols can't run because they're wood and stone. So they're just left there and they're like, oh, well, we better keep going. And so then David and his men are like, do something. And they can't. So they just pick them up, carry them away. Like, isn't it just brilliant? Because you see God defeating the enemies. Like, you see it, God of the breakthrough, right in this moment when it was like the moment when there should be a celebration, then the enemy comes right at the point of like victory, but also right in the middle of their weakness and tries to separate, and then God goes, no, I'm God of the breakthrough. Boom. It's awesome. But right before that happens, right before that moment, David's in the stronghold, and he's gathering his men to him. And we actually have that story in 2 Samuel chapter 23. And the reason why I used to love this when I was growing up and the pastor was droning on, this passage and this portion of Scripture was the Scriptures that I would read, because you've got the stories of the mighty men, right? These are the mighty men who have, like, they fought lions in pits on snowy days and had books written about them, right? There's the 30, but then there's also the 3. There's the Abishai who defeated that Ishi-Benob guy I just mentioned. Abishai's like the chief of the army, of the 30 there, and of the 3, it was Abishai. Ishi-Benob is not mentioned very deeply in Scripture, but David didn't just fight one giant, Goliath. He also fought Ishi-Benob. But Ishi-Benob didn't get a chapter because his name is Ishi-Benob. And it doesn't roll off the tongue like Goliath does. And but also, David almost lost. He was about to lose until Abishai showed up and killed Ishi-Benob for him. Then there's Eleazar. Of Eleazar, it says that he and David at one point were in the Pas Danim, which is, we kind of have an idea of where it is, but they were taunting the enemy, and the Philistines come running at them, and all the rest of the Israelites run away. And it's David and Eleazar standing there, and it says that Eleazar fought all day long alongside David, to the point where it said at the end of the day, his hand was frozen to the sword. The literal is, his hand was one with the sword, which sounds really cool, but just means that his hand couldn't open unless he pried the fingers open after fighting all day long, gripping that sword. And then there was Shammah. Shammah, the third of the 3, it says that at one point he also was leading a band of Israelites against the enemy, and they're standing in the middle of a field of lentils, and all the rest of his men run, but he remains in the middle of the field of lentils until sundown. He fought the enemy and turned them away. And as a kid, I remember thinking, fiber is important in your diet. So these are the 3, Abishai, Eleazar, and Shammah. And so David's down in his stronghold, having been run out of Jerusalem, and his men begin to gather to him there. And the stronghold that he's in is a stronghold he had been in before. Let's start verse 13, 23, verse 13. And 3 of the 30 chief men, that's the 3, went down and came about harvest time to David at the cave of Adullam. This is the stronghold that when Saul was pursuing David, he went and he hid in. And the first time men began to gather around him was here. So when a band of Philistines was encamped in the valley of Rephaim, so this is after he has fled and he is gathering those men to him, these 3 come. David was then in the stronghold, and the garrison of the Philistines was then at Bethlehem. So the Philistines are encamped in Rephaim, and they have their garrison at Bethlehem. So their headquarters is in Bethlehem, the birthplace of David. Do you think that's an accident? No. They are taunting David here. They are saying, oh, you got yourself a new king. Wonder how great he is. Oh, you mean he cannot even defend his hometown? So David is in the stronghold. The Philistines are spread out. And essentially they're baiting him, right? Where there's bait, there's a trap. They are baiting him to come out and fight in Bethlehem. And so David is king of all Judah and Israel, but he's hiding in a cave somewhere, and they are deliberately thumbing their nose at him. And then these 3, Abishai, Eleazar, and Shammah, show up. And here's I love this. 23, verse 15. And David said longingly, this is why I love this so much. Oh, that someone would give me water to drink from the well of Bethlehem that is by the gate. This week I had my doctor's appointment, my annual physical. And as I was sitting there with the doctor, I didn't bring it up. They did. They said, you know, the thing about Springfield is that the water is terrible. And I said, yeah, isn't that weird? You'd think with a name like Springfield that the water would taste good. But the city water in Springfield is atrocious. It tastes like rust and something else mixed in there. Metal. Blech. It's terrible. The first time I had water in Springfield, I was shocked at how terrible it was. I mean, never mind. I'm just going to move on. But at home, we have nice, good well water. And the water tastes so incredibly good. Now, at my house, we have an issue, okay? Maybe that was a warning from the Lord. Don't go down this path, Alan. No, I'm pretty sure the best place to deal with marital issues is publicly. And so Liz and I have this thing, and I enjoy it way more than she does, but I don't know how it started. But somewhere in there, I drink a lot of water when we're eating and stuff like that, and so somewhere in there, I decided that at dinner or lunch, wherever we are, after I drink my water, that I'll wait until Liz is looking away and I'll switch our glasses. I know, right? Which is hilarious the first time she picks it up and realizes it's empty. Hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. And yeah, no, I know. This is, but it's really, the problem is on her end, not mine, because ultimately what's hers is mine, you know? That's what the Bible says, I think, somewhere in there. And so the other day, like yesterday, literally yesterday, we're watching a movie, and she has water. And so I went, like I was, going to cuddle with her, but I was reaching for the water, and she didn't think that was funny. So I tried again and again and again, and I never once got her water. And so I said, oh, that someone would go to the sink and get me water. And it did not work. And then I said, Jesus said, I was hungry and you gave me something to eat. I was thirsty and you gave me something to drink. And they said, when were you thirsty, Jesus? I'm sorry. And that didn't work either. And at first I used to think that that's what David was doing here. Oh, that someone would get me water to drink from the well by the gate in Bethlehem. But this summer, we went up to Green Lake in Wisconsin, and we used to go there all the time when I was a kid, all the time. And we sometimes would go camping, sometimes we would rent a house, but it was always my favorite part of going to Green Lake was there's this little country store. And I remember when we were kids, we would, because I guess they didn't care if we survived or not, my parents would just say, all right, yeah, go have fun. And so we would go together, just me, my brothers, my sister, whatever, and go to the country store on the other side of the grounds. And we would get there, and they had three things that I remember. Number one, penny candy. Oh, penny candy. There's nothing like penny candy. I'm pretty sure it was Tootsie Rolls, but there is nothing like penny candy. And then they had ice cream. And during the hot of summer, there was nothing as refreshing as the ice cream from the country store. And then they had glass-bottled root beers. And I've had glass-bottled root beers in other places, but none of them is the same as the glass-bottled root beers that I had at the country store growing up. So I went back this summer, and we went to the country store. And they still had all of those things. And not one of them tasted as good as I remembered them tasting. And I think the difference is the nostalgia. And that's what David's doing here. These three mighty men come, and they say to David, hey, just so you know, the Philistines are garrisoned in Bethlehem. And I think in this moment he is remembering coming in from the fields after a long, hot day and getting there and getting that drink of water from the well by the gate. So he says, oh, man, those were simpler times when things were much easier. Oh, for water from that well. So these three guys, then the three mighty men, broke through the camp of the Philistines and drew water out of the well of Bethlehem that was by the gate and carried and brought it to David. This is 13 miles away. So 13 miles there, 13 miles back. For the sake of the story, let's round it up 0.2 of a mile. That's 26.2 miles. They ran a marathon carrying all their armor and weapons, and in between the two halves of this marathon, they fought a battle. And we don't know how they fought the battle, but I can guarantee you if this is a trap, the enemy was there. And I can guarantee you the two most defended places in Bethlehem are the gate and the water supply. And yet somehow, the three of them, two of them fighting while one's drawing the water, somehow they run 13 miles there, they fight a battle, draw the water, and run 13 miles back. And they arrive. But he would not drink of it. He poured it out to the Lord. Verse 17, then Abishai punched him in the nose. And said, verse 17, far be it from me, O Lord, that I should do this. Shall I drink the blood of the men who went at the risk of their lives? Therefore he would not drink it. These things the three mighty men did. I love that line. Oh, this is just the kind of thing these guys did. These things the three mighty men did. But there it says that David understands the value of this offering. He knows the value of this gift, which says something about David's character, because some people would not do that. Some people, when brought water like this, would say, where's the ice? Right? It's called entitlement. Where's the ice? It's kind of warm. It's a little tepid. But that's not David. He is king over all the land. But he's not sitting there thinking, is this gift good enough for me? He is asking, am I good enough for this gift? And he realizes the answer is no. And that there is only one who is worthy of that level of loyalty, honor, devotion, and sacrifice. That there is only one king who deserves this kind of gift. And so he says, this is not for me. And he pours it out as a drink offering before the Lord. And this is why men gathered to David, because he was this type of a leader. This is why when he showed up in the cave of Adullam the very first time, an army gathered around him and he became a force to be reckoned with. And this is why the second time he shows up, they gather around him again and they go and they defeat the Philistines, because he is this type of a leader. That's why there is this list here. This is why you read through it and you have name after name and all these doers of great deeds, as it says in verse 20. And you can read of those who snatched a spear out of an Egyptian's hand and killed him with his own spear. And you can read of those who did kill a lion in a pit on a snowy day. And you can read all the way down to verse 37, and Zelek the Ammonite, and Nahari the Beeroth, and the armor bearer of Joab, the son of Zeruiah, and Ira the Ithrite, and Gareb the Ithrite, and Uriah the Hittite, 37 in all. The very last name on that list is Uriah the Hittite. Now, why would God do that? If you don't know that name, that's the name of Bathsheba's husband, of David's greatest betrayal, of someone who showed him loyalty, devotion, honor, and sacrifice that David then betrayed. Why would God make sure that the last name on the list is Uriah the Hittite? It's no coincidence. Ultimate betrayal. One of David's greatest failures, if not his greatest. And the answer is because David was exactly right. No one deserves this level of devotion and honor and sacrifice. David certainly didn't, because he has a list, and at the bottom of that list is Uriah the Hittite. And everybody ultimately fails. And I think we know this inherently. We were talking about this in our small group on Wednesday. We all know in every relationship that ultimately the other side of that, and in ourselves we see it, there's weakness and there's failure. And often what we do is we wait for the other shoe to drop, right? We get cynical, at least I do. Often we realize that ultimately, because we know ourselves, we know what's in the hearts of others to some degree. And so we're always waiting for the failure. We're always waiting for the fault. We're never surprised when the other shoe does drop, because we've kind of held out and so we hold back. We kind of keep ourselves a little bit reserved, right? Paul even talks about this in 2 Corinthians chapter 6, verse 11, when he's speaking to the Corinthians. And we definitely do this with our leaders. And Paul here, as a leader to this church, speaks to them and says, we have spoken freely to you, Corinthians. Our heart is wide open. You are not restricted by us, but you are restricted in your own affections. In return, I speak to as to children, widen your hearts also. He tells them this because he says to them, essentially, listen, man, I have been open-hearted towards you, and yet you have put some restriction on your own heart. You have kept yourself from opening your heart to the same level. You are not as open in your hearts as I am towards you. In 1987 at Talladega, Bobby Allison's race car flew off the track, smashed into the fence, destroyed 100 feet of fencing, and all kinds of debris flew into the audience. At the same time, Bill Elliott set 2 records for the fastest speed on a racetrack. The cars kept getting faster. So NASCAR got spooked. The cars were getting too fast. So they came up with a requirement that on each car they would put a plate over on the air intake on the engines, restricting the amount of air that goes into the engine, thereby decreasing the horsepower of the engines and the speed of the car. It didn't allow enough air in, and as a result, the car itself wasn't running at full power. The drivers hated it, and for 30 years they hated it. So in 2019, NASCAR said, hey, we're removing the restrictor plates from the air intake, and all the drivers were ecstatic about it. And so they replaced the restrictor plate on the air intake with what they called a variable size spacer, which is a metal plate which restricts air intake on the manifold. Does the exact same thing, they just gave it a new name. It still has a restrictor on it. Because if they don't put the restrictor on it, it runs at 740 horsepower, and they needed it to be in the 500 horsepower range. So they put this restrictor on the engine. And Paul says that's what's happening with the Corinthians. He says, you have restricted your affections. You have put a restrictor plate on your heart. You are not fully opening up. We do this to one another because we do not deeply trust one another, because we are cynical, because we've been hurt before. We put a restrictor plate on our heart. We do this with one another, and then, without even trying, we do it with him. And so David, many years later before he died, he told his son in 2 Chronicles chapter 28, verse 9, he said, as he was handing off the kingdom in many ways, but as he was preparing for the temple to be built, he says to Solomon in verse 9, and you, Solomon, my son, know the God of your father and serve him with a whole heart. With a whole heart and with a willing mind, for the Lord searches all hearts and understands every plan and thought. If you seek him, he will be found by you, he says. He tells them, you have this tremendous honor of leading the people in a time of blessing. You will build the temple. No restrictors on your heart, though. Do not restrict yourself. Instead, with your whole heart, serve him. With a willing mind, serve him. And then a bit later, you see David share this in verse 17 of chapter 29. And here it's after the offering is taken up as David has given for the temple. He says this in 29 verse 17. I know, my God, that you test the heart and have pleasure in uprightness. In the uprightness of my heart, I have freely offered all these things. And now I have seen your people who are present here offering freely and joyously to you. O Lord, the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Israel, our fathers, keep forever such purposes and thoughts in the hearts of your people and direct their hearts towards you. So David had given personally, and he'd watched as others had done it too. And David says then, this is a matter of the heart. And he is talking about giving. He says giving is a matter of the heart. The Bible talks about giving all the way through. If there is one thing that God certainly has done first and calls us to respond to, it is giving. He gives all the way through the thing and definitely gives in giving his very best to us in his Son, Jesus Christ, the one that he had to give, he gave. And then it calls us to be giving and generous people as well. And there's so much stuff we could talk about when it comes to giving. We could talk about the fact that the tithe belongs to God, that it is his, and that when we do not give that, it is robbing God. We can talk about the fact that when we give, he gives back to us, and that there is this blessing. And he even said, test me in it. We could talk about that as well. But what I want to talk about today is the benefit of giving to you. And as I do this, know this, we have not taken up an offering, a physical offering in this service in over 3 years. 3 years. And that is a result of faithful giving of people in this church. So I am not coming to you in a matter of need. This is not about us needing. This is about us giving you an opportunity to do something in your own heart. Because both of these passages, the one David, as he's praying, and the one with Paul, both of them, as they're talking about wholehearted love of God, both of them are actually passages about giving. You see, giving has this incredible ability to remove the restrictor plate off of our heart. It has this incredible ability to what cynicism infects, to actually serve to remove that. Because we do serve God with that same restrictor plate in place too often. We half-heartedly love and serve in order to protect ourselves. But here's the thing about God. You will get to know him more and more and more throughout the years. And if you have put your faith in Jesus Christ, you will spend your eternity getting to know him more and more, better and better. You will know him in increasing ways in all of his infiniteness. And through all of that, you will never find a skeleton in his closet. There is no Uriah on God's list. He is the only one who is worthy of the level of devotion shown to David here. And David realized it. He said, this is not for me, it is for God. He is the only one who deserves your whole, unadulterated, complete, unrestricted heart. And giving has this incredible ability to open your heart up. It has a supernatural ability to remove the restrictor plate from your heart. As you give, yes, God blesses. The tithe does belong to God. Yes, he said, test me in this. But at the most basic level, giving moves your heart. It opens it up to more full love and devotion and loyalty to him. And he is worthy of that. We don't talk about giving at Praise enough. And I've realized that. Not for our sake, but for all of our sake. If we want to be people who are pressing in to know him, then we need to be people who give. We need to be generous in response to his generosity to us. And that's what David said. I mean, even in that passage, what does he say? That as we are giving, keep forever such purposes and thoughts in the hearts of your people and direct their hearts towards you. This is a matter of response to God for what he has done for us. This is a matter of removing the restrictor plate of our heart. It is a matter of rooting out the cynicism that maybe has been built into us after leader after leader after leader have failed us. After all around, we're tired of being burned or hurt. And so we develop this little callus. We develop this little restriction over our heart. But God says, I want it all. And unfortunately, that's not easy. But through giving, as a part of that, our hearts can open up to him. I've seen it personally in my own life. And I've seen it personally in others' lives as well. And so I guess I say all of that to declare this, that we will talk about giving more at Praise. And that's not, I seek not what is yours, Paul said. I seek you. That's really what it's about. Paul said, man, it's not about what you have. I don't want that. What I want is you, because God wants all of you. And so just like David, recognizing that no one else is worthy of it, that is about giving to him. And so I will continue to challenge us in this moving forward. And it is a matter of growing in our faith in him. All those other things are part of it, and more needs to be talked about it, but it also moves our heart, removes restrictor plates. I'm going to invite you to stand with me today. And I want to end differently today, because I really, even just in worship, I just sensed that this isn't how I was planning on ending, but we've got some time here. And I really sense that there's a couple different kinds of people in here. That there are some who know exactly what I'm talking about. Where, man, it's like your heart's not running full open towards God. You know what I'm saying? Like, you feel it. And you know why it is. Maybe truly someone else did burn you. Maybe somewhere along the line you did just wreck out, man, and it went bad. And so as a result, you're like, okay, I'm just going to pull back a little bit, and I'm going to go ahead and restrict just a little bit, man. I just need like 25% off the top that doesn't belong to him. I'm not going to run full bore, right? I'm just going to reserve a little bit. I'm going to keep myself from fully trusting. I'm just going to provide an out in case it doesn't go the way that he promised it will go. Like, I'm just going to make sure to keep a little bit back. And there are some people who are in here who know exactly what I'm talking about when I talk about that. And man, if that's you, lay it out. Put it all on the line. Because there are no skeletons in his closet. There is no Uriah on his list. It is him, and you will grow in knowing him, and you will find that he is better than you could ever have imagined. And in all of his infiniteness, you will find that he is infinitely beautiful, infinitely perfect, and he is worthy of that full level of devotion, honor, and sacrifice. And so don't hold back, and don't allow that restrictor plate to remain. But then I also think, and this was the part as I was worshiping, and we were just doing that song, or it was the first two songs actually, that just kind of really deeply spoke to me. That there are some people who, man, even as that situation that David was in with the Valley of Rephaim, right when he had a great victory, and it's like the enemy came in, and he, right in the weakest spot that you thought was like your strongest spot, he just took you down hard. Man, more than anything else, you're like right before that point. Verse 17 and 18, you're right there. You haven't gotten to verse 19 where God says, go up and take it, and he becomes God of the breakthrough. You haven't reached that verse yet. But you're waiting, and you're like, God, I need you. I need you to be God of the breakthrough for me in this situation. And maybe it is one of those where it was a victory, and you saw the enemy come against you harder than you could have ever imagined. And then all of a sudden it took you down. And so you feel like you're down in the stronghold and you're just waiting to build up strength in order to go back. Man, and if that's you, he is God of the breakthrough. He said, I am God of the breakthrough for you. You will break through.